Good morning and good afternoon. Welcome everyone to the Intact webinar about the tech-savvy CFO. And in particular, we're talking about closing the automation gap in finance. My name is Mark Gervais. You see my name there up on the screen. I'm on the product marketing team here at Intact. Some people tell me I am like a tech-savvy CFO, and others tell me I'm neither tech-savvy nor the CFO. The truth is, I'm a former CPA, and have spent the last decade or so in Silicon Valley in a variety of product and technology roles. So I'm a little tech savvy, and I never quite made it to be a CFO. But I am here today to talk to you about automation, about your role in finance, and really, what it takes to be tech savvy in today's world of constant change and constant transition. Now, before we dive in, I do want to go over some housekeeping. So we do expect that you'll have some questions during the webinar, and in fact that's what makes it interesting, getting the chance to respond to your comments or answer your questions. So use that Q&A box to submit questions whenever it strikes you, and we'll take a look at those and do what we can to take some breaks here and there. In fact, I'll even be asking some polling questions to get your opinion on a couple of different topics throughout the webinar, plus it just breaks it up and keeps you awake, right? So if for some reason you ask a question and we don't get a chance to answer it, because we'll be going an hour here, and then if I run a little long, I'll make sure that we follow up with you afterwards. Now, if it looks like you're the only one on the webinar, that's intentional. We've anonymized the participation, so when you ask questions, nobody can see you, you can't see anybody else. Nobody knows you're here but us here in the webinar room here. We are recording this, so if you want to take a look at the slides, or if you want to review a particular section or share it with your colleagues, we're going to let you do that. Give us a couple days and you'll get an email from us with a link to the recording. And when we're all done, we are going to have a survey. It takes 20 seconds to fill out, so if you wouldn't mind spending a few extra seconds at the end of the webinar letting us know a little bit about yourself and what you thought of our time today, we'd greatly appreciate it. So, are you ready to be a tech-savvy CFO? What I like about doing these webinars is that we get some CFOs on there who are looking to become more tech-savvy, but we get a lot of people who want to learn more about what it's like to be a CFO, and I think there's some valuable information in here for all of you. And we start with the premise that the role of the CFO will never be the same. And that's because there's all sorts of factors driving change in the role. The board, the finance team, stakeholders within the firm, and most of all, and where we're going to focus our time today, is technology is driving change in the CFO role. And so it takes a tech-savvy CFO, and what I mean by that is, someone who understands and embraces both the disruptive power, yet the helpful nature of technology. And you need that to navigate the future. Because already technology is probably turning your company's business upside down, whether it's in the form of new competition, new market opportunities, new ways to deliver value to your customers, or new ways that customers want to engage with you. So for a CFO, technology is all that, yet it provides something else. It provides an opportunity to transform how you do things internally. So a tech-savvy CFO is trying to modernize, trying to transform the company's business systems, trying to transform that IT infrastructure to do three things, really. One, to boost staff productivity. Two, to keep the company ahead of the competition. And three, to give the company flexibility for the future. So today, we're going to cover how you, as a CFO, can be tech-savvy about understanding and closing what what I call the automation gap. And so the logical question you should be asking me or yourself is, what is the automation gap? And so I'm going to answer that, but I'm going to answer it with a set of questions. So here are my questions for you, our lovely audience. Are the number of spreadsheets in your finance team proliferating? Not the ones used for ad hoc and analysis, but the ones that you use for your day-to-day activities, your core spreadsheets. Is that growing? Also, do you find yourself with the need to hire more contract or full-time staff in order to manually validate data, enter more transactions, keep up with the number of journal entries and adjustments? Think about that one. Or is your time to close the books increasing? Or is your finance team completely overwhelmed at month end? And lastly, does it take more and more time every month to create the monthly management reporting package? If you're experiencing any of these symptoms, if you answered yes to any of these questions, you are in the middle of the automation gap. And so to understand the automation gap and what to do about it, we're going to rewind the clock a bit. We're going to reach back into the past, and we're going to go back to the last time your organization switched out an ERP or got a new financial management or accounting system. And so before we take that trip down memory lane, I just want to get a sense of where you are. How far back are we going? So for our first polling question, I want you to think about how long your organization has been using your current financial system. Or thinking about in another way, when was the last time you switched to the system you're currently on, right? And we're talking about the core accounting system, not something used for FP&A, but your actual GL. So we've opened the polls, and thank you for your responses. We'll keep it open for a few more seconds, but I see that a number of you are answering, and we'll post those results in a second. There's a lot of research out there that talks about the lifespan of an ERP system. Some says you should expect your system to last 7, others say 10 to 15, and others, more anecdotally, but think 15 to 20 years is the average life expectancy of an ERP. That seems long. However, based on the poll results, are we pushing these out there?
Yep.
Okay, everyone can see them. Good. So the majority are in that 4 to 7 year window, but very close behind are people stretching it to 8 years or more. So, that validates a lot of the research that says, commonly 7 years or 10 to 15 years. I think that's where most of the people are who responded today, although there's still a fair number in that less than 3 year role. A couple of you are unsure, totally fair. Not usually the first question you ask in your new job, how long have we been on this system? So now that we know a little bit about this Wayback Machine that we're going to, and in some cases we're going back potentially into the 90s, which is great, that was my heyday. Let's go back to this last time you switched and assume that you followed some best practices for selecting that system back in the day. So you went and you identified what your specific business and accounting process requirements were. You looked at procure to pay, monthly close, and management reporting, and you evaluated all the different options out there, and you found the one that had the best fit for your requirements. Pretty standard process. And you likely ended up with something great. You were happy with it. It was state-of-the-art, met all your needs, gave you process automation. Everything in finance was running smoothly after a couple months getting used to it. But fast forward to today, you probably find yourself in a very different situation. Thinking back to the questions I just asked you, you probably are using a lot more spreadsheets. You're hiring additional staff, even part-time. Takes longer to close the books than it used to. And additionally, you are finding that there's a gap between the information you have and the information you need to make important business decisions. Those are the symptoms of the automation gap. So because most good software evaluations and processes look like this, you ended up with a good thing. But again, today, you're in trouble. So this was a long way of kind of getting to the point here of the automation gap is a function of two things. It's the processes that your current system automates, the system that you bought 1 to 3 years ago or 15 years ago, and second, it's what your finance needs to get done today on that day in, day out basis. The things that you need to do to make sure the trains are running on time, right? Recording transactions accurately, closing the books efficiently, delivering decision-making information to senior leadership to keep the organization moving in the right direction. And so whenever there's a difference between what your system can do and what you need, that white space in between, that's the automation gap. In fact, I'm going to fill that in. It's the black space in between. And so here at Intact, we speak day in and day out with CFOs who have come to us looking for a way out of this automation gap or to close the automation gap, whatever metaphor you want to use to describe this dark area in between capabilities and needs. And these conversations with our customers or with prospective customers, have given us a very unique perspective on that gap. And we want to share with you in this webinar, in our remaining 45 minutes or so together, some of the knowledge and some of the collective experience that we've learned to help you understand it, address it, and be effective in closing that automation gap. So this is our outline. This is kind of where we're going to spend 15 minutes each or so on each of these topics. We're going to address these 3 important questions. First, if you're like many CFOs and finance leaders we speak with, you're finding that not only do you have an automation gap, but it's growing. It's growing at an accelerating pace. And the first question we'll address is why? Why is this automation gap expanding at an accelerating pace? That's number one. Second, you've probably put into place a set of strategies for addressing that automation gap already. You're not going to just let it go to heck. You've got some survival strategies and coping tactics, and we'll look at those tactics closely and give you some pointers so you can evaluate how long you can reasonably expect to use them without risking accuracy, compliance, speed, etc. And third, if you've been through financial system evaluations and changes before, and it looks like many of you have within even the last 3 years, you've already been through a round of closing the automation gap. But as I mentioned earlier, technology is constantly changing, and if you're tech savvy about closing your current automation gap, you can put yourself in a situation where that gap does not reappear so quickly. So we're going to talk about some strategies for closing the automation gap in a very modern, tech-savvy way. So let's get cracking on this first question. Why is the automation gap expanding at an accelerating pace? There's underlying business reasons why this is happening, and they really have to do with the impact that technology is having on your business environment. So to start answering this question, I'm going to go back to some insights that we shared during our first webinar in this series. And if you want to go take a look, we did a webinar a while back called Introducing the Tech Savvy CFO, and that's up on Intact.com on demand. If you missed it, go back and take a listen. It's another hour-long webinar. And during this session, you heard very little from me. We actually heard from Brian Sommer. He's a noted industry analyst and business systems expert. Used to head it up at Accenture and now has been out on his own as a consultant for many years. But Brian shared his insights on the profound impact that technology was having on industries, firms, and specifically the finance function. It's basically a scared straight for CPAs. And one of Brian's observations was that the way investors are valuing businesses has changed drastically due to the impacts of technology. So I'm borrowing from Brian here, but in the traditional ways of looking at a business, the metrics that investors focused on were measures like NPV, future cash flows. You all remember this in your HP 12C in school, right? Or multiples of income. And in some industries, the value of tangible assets was the primary driver of valuation, which makes sense in manufacturing and heavy equipment type of industries. But what's happening with the impact of technology is that there are all these new school measures based on the fact that the value creating application of technology is what's significant now. And Brian went through some great examples of Google and Facebook and these companies that have very little in the way of physical assets, but it's all about how they use and create value through technology. So, multiples now are focused not on income, but on measures of applying technology to scale and how they're going to dominate markets. And so these new school measures have a very different complexion than the old school measures. Metrics like compound annual growth rate are what investors focus on, billings growth rate. And so, if you put Brian's observations about the old school and the new school measures side by side, like we've done here for you, the difference that really stands out is the increasing importance of growth. It's all about growth. It's not what have you done for me lately, it's what are you going to do for me in the future. And because growth is such a prominent valuation driver, people are focused on how technology can help them get there, how technology enables companies to scale more quickly, ability to leverage technology to achieve scale, so you can grow fast to gain more market share and dominate and win those markets. It's the old, Amazon strategy that many companies are applying these days. And what we see among the prospects that we speak with, people who are looking to make a change in ERP systems and are considering Intact, every single one we talk to has growth at the top of their agenda, because the technology-driven opportunities for growth today are unparalleled. We haven't seen anything like this. So let's pause for a moment. Everyone can catch their breath. Grab a drink from my water bottle here. I want to turn to a poll, and I want to get a sense of how your company's growth goals sit relative to others who are attending the webinar here. So take a moment to answer this question about your organization's revenue growth goals during the year. Are they fairly modest, aggressive, super aggressive? While you're answering that, I'm going to take a quick drink here. Just water. My producer's laughing at me here. The majority of mid-market companies that we work with, Intact is focused on the mid-market, they all have extremely aggressive goals. And these growth goals are typically what's driving them to get more efficient about their financial management processes. And the bulk of our customers come in with ambitious growth goals well over 20%. And so looking at the breakdown here among the participants, first of all, thank you for responding and taking the time and effort to snap to attention. We see that the majority is in that 6 to 10% range, but a decent number under that and right above that. So kind of a number of you are under 5%, but then just as many are in that 11 to 20%, right, going for that double-digit growth. And looks like about 20% of the people who responded are above, or 21% above, very aggressive. So that gives me a pretty good idea that most of you on this webinar today are a mid-sized company and have some pretty aggressive growth goals. So thank you again for answering the poll. Let us know if you have any questions as we're going through this. I'll be happy to pause and answer. What I'm going to do now, I want to share a few examples from our customers. and the strategies that they pursued in order to achieve their growth goals. Nothing like a good case study. And if you look closely at the business strategies that companies are trying to execute in order to grow, you'll see a direct impact on the finance organization, a direct impact on the old automation gap. So, one of the strategies that mid-sized companies are using to support growth is geographic expansion. Essentially sticking to the core of what they do and do well and the value they deliver, but entering new geographies from which they can deliver services, or new markets that represent new customers they can serve. So STS International is just one example. They're an Inc. 5000 IT outsourcer that had a track record of doubling revenues in 3 years. Very successful. That's what gets you on the Inc. 5000. And they grew to deliver projects in over 86 countries. But they constantly shifted the locations from which they delivered services to clients in order to deliver at the lowest possible cost. That's a big part of their strategy. Another example, Tandem HR. Their growth strategy was around diversifying the services that they delivered. Tandem HR, another Inc. 5000 company, they do HR outsourcing, and their mission is to provide their clients a Fortune 500 HR infrastructure, world-class. And in order to do that, they had to aggressively expand their offerings to compete with, the HR providers that were actually in the Fortune 500. So they started with core HR staffing, and then they diversified in the core benefits administration, voluntary benefits administration, on-site employee assistance, and so on. So a lot of their growth came from expanding services. Another example of using business strategy to drive growth is moving to a recurring revenue model. Very popular here in Silicon Valley, but also throughout the country. So, a great example is Trunk Club. They're Chicago-based. In fact, they're an interesting organization. They're a subscription-based business for men's fashion, and their customers subscribe to their service, and they deliver a monthly selection of clothing, accessories. Customers keep what they like and return the rest. And they were so successful, they actually got bought by Nordstrom and are still operating independently and doing their thing, doing it very well. Go ahead and give them a look, gentlemen. So anyway, the trend towards a subscription business and recurring revenue is not just for what you think of like web businesses and technology-based businesses, but it can be any type of business, including men's fashion. So pause here again. Let's take a step back and recap what's going on. First, growth is a huge driver of how companies are valued. And two, companies are pursuing a variety of new strategies to deliver growth, whether it's geographic expansion, diversification into new types of services, or moving to a recurring revenue model with a subscription. So I want to bring this back. How does this relate to finance? The tech-savvy CFO, how does it relate to the automation gap? Well, every single one of these growth strategies is going to change what the finance organization does on a day-to-day basis. And these changes are forcing finance organizations to rely so much on manual processing because older systems weren't equipped to handle this type of growth, growth strategies. So let's look at these three growth strategies in a different way. I want to look at them now, not on the impact they're having on the business, but on the automation gap. So everyone snap to attention, wake up again. We're going to keep this moving. And I want to know what business strategies is your organization pursuing to drive growth. And this one, you should be able to check all that apply, more than one. Hopefully this works. Relying on WebEx here to run our poll. It's a great little product, and hopefully the poll works for you. So we'll give you a few more seconds to fill it out. Thank you. Everyone's jumping on this one, so we'll have a good sample size. Keep it open for a few more seconds. Take a sip here of my water. Getting a comment that the poll is only allowing some people to select one. I apologize for that. We are pushing the edge of the envelope with polling technology within WebEx. So we may not have the perfect set of responses here because we asked for multiple, and I think it was just allowing people to do one. Thanks for letting us know. We'll try and fix that in the future. But it looks like adding new service offerings was very popular, but fairly even distribution among geographic, M&A, and adding new service offerings. Less so with pricing and packaging, subscriptions, and less so with new distribution channels. So thank you. That gives us another baseline to go after it. So hopefully the examples I give here then will be relevant to you. So let's talk about geographic expansion. There is about a quarter of you out there who are looking at this as a strategy. And so, geographic expansion introduces new complexities into accounting and finance, whether it's domestic or international, and whether it's through acquisition or organic. And if you don't have an automated way to manage multiple entities, you're going to be stuck with this massive consolidation spreadsheet and managing all your elimination entries and intercompanies, the way I used to do things back in my CPA days in the 90s. Finance managers need to figure out how to quickly integrate new locations into your process and into the financial reporting infrastructure. Whether it's disparate charts of accounts, you've got to have a process that's consistent in terms of controls, workflows, how your organization deals with vendors and customers, and record keeping there. Multiple entities also introduces the complexity of intercompany transactions, which we typically see people dealing with manually. So without automation, again, you're consolidating data from multiple databases, maybe one for each location. You're using spreadsheets to do your roll-up for your summary financials. And to further complicate things, a lot of time expansion is done via complex ownership structures, some sort of joint venture, partial ownership. So that adds another layer of complexity to your calculations, whether it's for financial reporting or tax reporting, sort of carving out minority interests. So some of you are probably looking to expand globally as well. And without automation in place, at the very least, you're doing currency valuations and conversions, transactions or balances. And if you're reporting locally in multiple currencies, you're going to be doing a lot of manual work there for your exchange gains and losses. So the fastest way to add more manual work to the finance team is to do geographic expansion. Great for the business, can be really rough on finance. Some of you are probably nodding your heads about this. Okay. If you are currently growing by diversifying into delivering new services, new offerings, you've probably seen automation gap in RevRec because most traditional ERP and finance systems aren't equipped to automate this. They're not good at the complexities of RevRec, especially when it comes to services. So, whether you're delivering new services, whether it's software or human capital-based projects, consultants and implementers, people out there turning time into money, you're having to deal with RevRec methods that are complex and require some judgment and require, of course, lots of supporting documentation. And I haven't even addressed the new RevRec standards coming, in the next couple of years. But every agreement with your customers is probably going to end up including multiple elements with different treatment for each one of them for RevRec. Your project-based services, recognizing milestone revenue, but your maintenance is at a certain percentage each quarter, just an example. And so, again, without automation, you got yourself one crazy spreadsheet. Or multiple crazy spreadsheets to do it all. And tracking down all the time and expense adds another layer of complexity. So, moving the right amounts at the right time from deferred revenue to recognized revenue, as your transaction volume increases, you end up with thousands of lines in a spreadsheet. And, you have to do this accurately for just, for compliance purposes, sure, but just to have visibility into your deferred revenue so you know how to make the right investment and business decisions, what's coming in, and how that booked revenue is turning into, unbilled, billed, deferred, recognized, and ultimately cash. And, frankly, in all my work as an auditor, in working with auditors here at Intact, we partner with a number of leading audit firms, spreadsheet-based RevRec is the #1 thing that's going to expand the scope of an audit. Your auditor has to understand the judgment you've used. They've got to check your math. They've got to have confidence that you've included everything for accuracy. They're going to spend days looking at your monster spreadsheet. Again, a number of you are probably nodding your heads about this. You've been through a RevRec audit. So looking at the slide, here are some of the common pain points we've heard from healthcare organizations that come to us. At an industry level, the healthcare industry is probably one of the most rapidly changing ones in the country. I was just in Nashville last week at a finance event, and that is the headquarters of a lot of the change in healthcare, not only healthcare companies, but software companies looking to transform healthcare. And so, some of the things that came up is, there's this renewed focus from healthcare providers about driving the best outcomes, but also doing it with cost containment. And so what we find is there's a tremendous amount of M&A and simultaneously organic expansion, right? Everybody's just trying to grow, and so that is straining finance teams. And so you need to figure out how to integrate these new locations, or how to deliver better financial reporting, and how to manage a new technology infrastructure. And there needs to be process consistency as well in terms of your controls, your workflows, how you deal with all this change. So, against this backdrop of just the business challenges, you're going to have some specific process and technology issues to deal with as a finance team. With multiple locations, many of the healthcare companies we talk to have end up with data in multiple systems. And many times there's a separate financial system at each location, and often it's not the same. You've got maybe an old Great Plains system out there, and then something that's sort of homegrown at another location, and then a healthcare-specific one. So it's not only different systems, it's different data. It's data that's not standardized. They treat their charts of account differently. Vendor lists are all different. And that lack of standardization creates a massive spreadsheet headache. And that's just to get organized. It has nothing to do with then taking the next step and getting a view into what's actually happening in the business. And so because of the spreadsheet work, the monthly close process is slow. And you need to go slow because you don't want to make mistakes. And you don't want to have to go back and make big adjustments because then everybody looks bad. And, this manual work is not just for financial reporting, but your operational reporting as well. So, for example, prior to coming to Intact, many healthcare organizations were missing out on a golden opportunity to save costs just because it was so difficult to get an aggregated view of spend by vendor across locations. And, you in finance want to pressure some of those vendors to keep costs down, and they're taking advantage of you because, they're talking to 14 different sites and, billing each site. So tremendous opportunity there, but tremendous challenge for finance. All right. So we've looked at geographic expansion, we've looked at diversification. Now let's, and we're not going to spend a lot of time on subscription. What's happening really is, I'm gonna kind of power through subscription billing here. And basically, when you move from perpetual to subscription, you're seeing volume changes, and you're seeing billing changes, and you might move from an annual or every 3 years to quarterly, monthly. You might start looking at usage. You're dealing more with perhaps refunds and more change orders, and you're changing your pricing again from perpetual or long-term contracts to more frequent. So again, this usually requires hiring more full-time people just to keep up with billing, and it can be painful. And so, when it comes to managing all these different growth strategies, it inevitably leads up to, well, how do we do? Is it working? And that's when you get to period close. And so, today there's this need for decision-making information, and management needs it faster and faster. In fact, 90% of companies surveyed in a recent survey show that they're under pressure to close faster. And what happens with that is that the quality is compromised. Only 28% trust the numbers that they're getting out of the system. So they're being asked to move faster, but quality suffers. And that's what a lot of organizations are facing today because of that automation gap. Is you can't spend, it's so hard to get the right numbers in that you don't trust what's coming out. Let's take a break here for some questions. We've talked about some growth strategies. I just want to make sure everybody's getting their questions answered. So, get those in. Oh gosh, I've got to I've got to read quickly here. So, ooh, yeah, this is a tough one. So, wouldn't you agree, here's one, wouldn't you agree every time you have to create a journal entry, that is where the automation control broke down? I mean, that's planting the seeds right there. And I'm gonna go on a limb and assume that we're talking like a manual journal entry or a reclass or some sort of adjustment. Yes, even if you've got the best automated process to get the journal entries in and manage, every time you've got to go adjust or redo or back out. There's a lot of systems where it takes 14 steps, or more to cancel out or to edit or change a journal entry. Things are breaking down, and whether it's the controller catching something at the end of the month, or an auditor catching something, asking you to reclass something, during the quarterly audit. Things can break down quickly, especially applying to these growth models as you increase the number of entities you have, or move to a subscription model where you're constantly recording, bills going out and cash collections coming in and all that can happen in between. You're setting yourself up for a big challenge. So a great comment, a great question. Thank you for asking that. I'm going to try and get to these other ones too, because they're good ones. So let's get back to the conversation topic. I need to pick up my pace a little bit. How long will these strategies for coping with the automation gap work? Right? So, we've seen some that work for a short time, and we've seen some that work for a little longer, but eventually you run out of steam. So the first way we see a lot of companies coping is through spreadsheets. No surprise there. And, I'm not advocating the elimination of spreadsheets. We live in the real world. Spreadsheets are handy. We all know and love them, but it's, when you start running into having dozens and dozens as part of your core activity is when you can get in trouble, right? And, there was a story within the last couple of years of, Goldman Sachs going through advising a client on an acquisition, and there was one spreadsheet error that ended up being a $100 million difference in the valuation. I'm sure that the hardworking associate who's probably working 20 hours a day on the deal got another job somewhere that's not at Goldman. But spreadsheets cannot sustain your automation gap forever. Changes and process and formulas are rarely documented in spreadsheets. It's generally a single employee who creates the spreadsheet and builds it and monitors it, and if that person ever leaves or wins the lottery, who knows where that historical record is kept. Again, changes are rarely captured, and so there's the audit trail that's missing. There's all the manual backup and version control and corruption, and again, when it comes to serious controls, if you're thinking about an IPO and going public and looking at SOX, spreadsheets create a whole risk of SOX compliance risks because of the lack of security and lack of controls. And so, a couple of quotes here, I think that help explain, what's going on. Spreadsheets cause errors, and there's rarely do people know enough to protect themselves from these errors. And in fact, looking at some research done by Ventana Research on spreadsheets in today's finance organizations, how long are people spending using spreadsheets? The hours and hours just keep going up. So, spreadsheets are a great tool, but they cannot be a crutch, and they cannot be a long-term crutch. Eventually, you need to get off those crutches and test that sprained ankle or sprained knee and find a better way. All right, the second way of coping, hiring. Just whatever your CFO wants to do is spend more money to fill that gap. Hiring is not the easiest thing to do. If you've noticed out there, there's some talent scarcity. It's kind of a good time to be in finance, some hot markets around the country. And so you can't just, put out a rec and have people lining up at your door. And, once you start increasing headcount costs, there's really no upper limit. You can't always go back. That creates more people management issues. Us people, we always need something. It creates more challenging control environment, more people that are touching things, more auditors need to check and make sure those processes have appropriate controls documented and followed. And then you have to start to ask yourself, at a certain point in time, am I just hiring people to do more clerical work, or is this truly strategic? And oftentimes when you've got a big automation gap, it becomes much more clerical. And so it is not easy to fill your automation gap with people. It's hard to do it, and once you do it, it's hard to go back. And even if you try to go back, you're just not dealing with a strategic function. So I will tell you that looking at some of our customers, and after making the switch to Intacct, they have grown, and they've done it without hiring. Solution Reach is an example who automated their subscription billing. Their revenue was growing 50% annually, and they saw a 30x increase in their monthly subscriptions, and their whole company went up from 150 to 600 employees. But they were able to save $200K in headcount in the finance group by not having to hire, instead by automating subscription billing. Mountainside Fitness, chain of fitness centers throughout the country, they had to automate their consolidations, and they needed to consolidate their purchasing because they were doubling their number of locations. And they had huge headcount savings as well by being able to centralize and automate some of these processes. And lastly, you see Hispanic Media. They needed to automate their close process. They were growing, and they had a lot of different advertisers and customers. They were doubling the distribution of the media where they were advertising. 21% revenue growth. They saved $100K by automating just the close process alone. So there are savings to be had, savings to be found. So that was a quick one through the stopgap measures. So let's get to the third and sort of final section here. And what is the tech-savvy way to close that automation gap? What are some of the best practices out there today? Remember, back to this slide, right? We all start off with the best of intentions. We all bought a system, that checked all our boxes and was going to prevent us from having the problems of the past. But, you know, as what happens with changes in technology and changes over time, you know, the process needs change faster than a system can keep up. Any new system risks being just a stopgap measure where history repeats itself. And these are legit concerns for anyone out there. So going forward, in order to set the stage for your ongoing growth, we recommend you look for a system that provides new capabilities frequently. This is not a crock pot where you set it or forget it, and set it and forget it. You need a finance system that is going to be updated and take care of things on a regular basis and get those new capabilities frequently, because your business is going to change and, you know, technology is going to change. Not only that, but look for a system that makes it easy to adopt these new capabilities. You know, there's so much in technology that we do not take advantage of because we don't know about it, or it's not intuitive, it's not user-friendly, and, you know, like the old saying that we only use 10% of our brains, it is a big waste of time and money to only use 10% of the capabilities of your financial systems. So let's talk about closing that gap. One of the obvious ways is to choose cloud, multi-tenant cloud ERP. Yes, a little self-serving. We're Intacct, this is what we do. But there are some legitimate reasons for doing this. If you look at the landscape for ERP and you think about, what do I need to get a new system? Well, hardware. Okay, got to have a bunch of servers. I got to have security, got to have backup, got to have disaster recovery. Who's in charge of that? If you're on-prem, that's you. And you're probably aware of that if you bought a system 15 years ago or more, 10 years ago or more. If you're moving to a multi-tenant cloud, that's what the vendor takes care of. That's what Intacct does. What about software? How does the software get upgraded? Well, if you're in the old legacy on-premises way, you pay for the updates, you do the upgrade. You take your system down, or you run it in parallel for a while, and you test it out, and you got to tell everybody, don't submit your expenses this week. We are upgrading the system. You know, there's a reason that people on Windows tend to go every other upgrade, because it is disruptive. If you're using a multi-tenant cloud solution, software upgrades are transparent. How often do you think Facebook or Google updates their software? They do hundreds of upgrades a week, and you don't notice. And that is the beauty of multi-tenant cloud. And how often does this happen? Well, you know, with on-premises ERP, you're going to get a major update every 2 or 3 years, and you're going to be tempted to skip it. And with multi-tenant cloud, you're going to get that multiple times per year. And it's going to happen usually over the span of 2 minutes during the middle of a quarter on a Friday night. If you're working then, bless you. But for most of us, we miss that update, come in the following Monday, and we are prepped and ready for what those changes are going to be, and then they're live. One other wrinkle I wanted to throw at you is this concept of a hosted cloud. And a lot of the legacy vendors, I'll name names, you know, Microsoft and the Microsoft and Sages of the world, for example, even the Oracle and SAPs up in the high end, are moving towards what they call cloud and what they call SaaS, but is truly a hosted model. Who owns it? Oh, they'll put it on hardware, you know, some sort of third-party data center, or they've created their own data centers, but that's the only benefit, because when it comes to the software upgrades, oh, you're still buying it. You're still paying somebody to do the upgrade work for you, maybe, and it costs just as much. Your cost structure doesn't change. How often is it updated? Oh, well, you're still getting it every 2 or 3 years. What you've done is you've outsourced your hardware, and that's a great benefit to you. Don't get me wrong, but that's not true cloud. That is certainly not SaaS. That is certainly not a multi-tenant environment where you're getting the benefits of scale. So don't be fooled. Do your homework and understand Ask your vendor, are you true multi-tenant cloud? And do a little Googling, do a little research, or call us, and we'll give you some definitions, some questions to ask, so you can get down to the bottom of it. Don't get stuck into just getting another legacy product on somebody else's hardware. Another thing you need to look for when you're considering your next ERP solution or your next finance solution to close that automation gap is the customization trap. So customization is required programming, required scripting to use any new capability. You add an entity, oh yeah, we're going to hire a consultant, he's going to come in and crack open some code and allow you to report on that new entity. It requires finance to depend on IT anytime they have an automation gap. This is very common. This is how software used to work in the 80s and 90s. It was IT driven. Oh, you need a new report. You need, you need to slice your income statement down to some additional detail. Put in an IT ticket for that. That is the customization trap. Software that is so highly customized that anytime you need something new, you can't do it. I want to introduce you to the concept of configuration. That is different than customization. Configuration lets you do it by yourself. So, with a configuration-driven ERP, you get a certain level of capabilities right out of the box, and then you can configure things yourself. Finance can do it. You need to add a field to capture new data, you do it yourself. You need to add a row to compare the old RevRec standards to the new RevRec standards, you do that yourself. There's a little bit of customization that you can do with Cloud ERP, but most of it's configurable. As opposed to ERP that is customization driven, that old school style, or based on an older architecture, where there's a few things you can configure and they'll tout that, but a lot of it is custom driven. And what you need to do is talk to some customers, get some references, and find out the cost and effort they've had through customization to maintain their system and to keep that automation gap small. When you talk to Intacct customers, they're going to tell you about how they do the changes themselves. And they have not had to open up IT tickets to make these changes, because over time, you're going to need some capability, and you're going to want to know if you can do it yourself or if you're going to have to hire somebody to do it for you. So again, if you're looking at customization-driven solution, there's a learning curve to figure all this stuff out, IT and consulting costs, and finance is just trying to manage all the open tickets. With Intacct, right, we've found customers that saved 50 grand a year on these consulting fees because they could do it themselves. They were able to automate so many different things that they were previously doing in Excel. And they were able to spend their time just focusing on visibility into the business. So professional testing is one example. They were paying NetSuite $50,000 in consulting fees to keep their quote-unquote cloud system up and running. They had so much customization that they got sick of paying all that money just to make the system work. There's a better way. So my tip to you, when choosing a new ERP system, choose configuration-driven ERP, right? Clicks, not scripts. Finance own it, heck yeah, versus no. Who's got the risk? Well, when it's configurable, the vendor's on the hook. They've got to make it easy for you, right? They've got to make it work. And when they upgrade, they've got to make sure that everything you've already configured or customized is going to work with the new version, right? If you've done some customization work and your vendor goes through a big upgrade and there's a lot of caveats, read the fine print. It might take forever, but you'll find that a lot of vendors out there do not guarantee that your customizations will work when you move to a newer version of the software. Cough, cough, NetSuite. And when it comes to upgrades, how much effort does it take? Besides breaking your customizations, you want to minimize the effort it takes to upgrade. All right, so going into wrap-up mode, Q&A mode here, we talked about these 3 questions. Here's what we did. We talked about the factors that are driving the automation gap. We talked about some ways to deal with them, and frankly, some are better than others. And we talked about some tech-savvy ways to get yourself out of the automation gap. And yeah, it kind of sounded like an Intact commercial, but you know, I work for Intact. So let's handle some questions. All right, so so many. You guys have done a great job asking all these questions. Now I've got to find some that I can actually answer in 4 minutes or less. Okay, issue with multi-vendor cloud. So for an ERP such as Oracle, they nickel and dime you for governance of your ERP. And when you ask for various common governance reports, they do not have it created and say it will be a special project. That is a great comment, not so much a question, but I think it addresses a lot of the factors I was just talking about with customization-driven ERP versus configuration-driven ERP. Charging you maintenance, those $50,000, this is a mid-sized company, right, professional testing, spending 50 grand. What percentage of revenue do you think that was? Just to have somebody on retainer to come in and keep their NetSuite software working every year to keep up with the business. So thank you for whoever made that comment. I love it, I agree with it, and I think it applies to everybody out there who's listening. Okay. Any suggestions on good databases so that fewer spreadsheets can be used? Or what are your thoughts on the cloud? So I'm going to kind of address that second piece. I just spent a lot of time talking about the cloud and the benefits. You know, finance has really been the laggard in moving to the cloud, and for reasons that make sense. This is sensitive data. This is secure financial information. We cannot have a breach. We cannot have this information go out there. And as a result, you know, CRM, HR, lots of other business systems are moving to the cloud and have moved to the cloud. And, you know, finance has been kind of slow to do it. But our thoughts on the cloud are that multi-tenant cloud vendors are about the safest bet you can make. And here's why. They're using enterprise-class, world-class data centers that have multiple physical and software layers of security. People cannot get in to these data centers. They cannot hack in, nor can they walk in. It's very hard to maintain your own data center. How many people can walk into your server room and spill coffee by accident? How many people can hack in? How up-to-date are your firewalls and gateways and security monitoring? Do you have 12 different vendors that you work with versus a cloud vendor whose business is based solely on keeping that data secure? When there's a breach in a cloud hosting solution, public or private cloud, it affects all of us in the cloud game. And so everybody is working hard and making it their responsibility to keep the hackers out. And frankly, most of the big data hacks that you see are on-premises data centers. You know, Target, Home Depot, et cetera. That was not cloud. That was their own data center. And because it's hard to keep a